Welcome to Tech Captains. I'm your host, Ron Dallenberg, and today with Gareth Thomas, we have Adelina Chalmers, the Geek Whisperer, joining us. Adelina excels at transforming first-time CTOs into strategic leaders, enhancing their expertise in business, strategy, and leadership. With a proven track record, you will tell us more about that in a few minutes, of boosting engineering performance and saving them a lot of money. Her impact is profound and far-reaching. So Adelina advises CTOs from companies ranging from 10 to 100,000 people, providing practical, tailored action plans. She helps engineering leaders align with C-suite expectations, make strategic decisions, and transform difficult teams into high-performing units. Her no fluff, but we will see, straightforward approach has earned her reputation as a trusted advisor for CTOs and CIOs and other engineering leaders from top companies like ARM, Fujitsu, Microsoft, etc. So in this episode, we'll explore Adelina's journey, her mentoring approach, and the results she delivers. So join us and the Geek Whisperer herself. So welcome to the show, Adelina.
Thank you so much for having me, Ron and Gareth.
Mhm.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you. So Adelina, just to start, so it says online you have a reputation for transforming first-time CTOs into strategic leaders. Could you share with us a success story that highlights this transformation process?
Oh, crikey. Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, one of the challenges that engineers have when they become CTO is that they focus too much on the technology. And I have actually a couple of examples, if you like. So one example, I mean, this guy, his title was VP of Engineering, and as you know, CTO, VP of Engineering, all of these terms are often interchangeable, depending on what the company feels like labeling people. I mean, this particular VP of Engineering had been in the role for, I believe, 18 months to 2 years. The company thought he was doing great, but he felt like he was failing. And his actually boss came to me saying, I think he needs, a few months of coaching or something. And I said, well, coaching is not always the solution. So I'd like to do a discovery project first, which is how I normally start. And I do a discovery phase where I interview the person, but I also interview the person above them, the person on the side of them, and someone managed by them. So, for example, let's say this VP of engineering had a CEO, had a CPO, and an engineer that was managed by him. And I interviewed all these people around as well as himself. And I discovered that the reason he felt that he wasn't adding value to the business, he felt like he wasn't doing, he felt like he doesn't know what he's doing. He felt like he's spending all his time in meetings and he's not adding any value and he's a fraud, essentially. What I discovered was that he didn't actually have a very clear job description. He didn't know, how do I from engineer now to a leader? How am I meant to spend my time differently? He had no idea. So instead of spending months of coaching, at the end of the discovery phase, which literally took a week, I showed him how he spends his time right now, and I told him, "You're spending your time. You're literally 30% engineer, 30% engineering manager, and you're only about 20% CTO, and the other 20% you do run around like a headless chicken, not knowing what you're doing." And I said to him, "This is how you spend your time right now. This is how a VP of engineering in a company of your size spends his time." And the moment he got that clarity of what his job is about, really, he immediately, literally said, "Oh my God, this is brilliant. I don't think I," and I said to him, "I don't think you need any coaching." And he said, "Oh, I think you're right. I know, obviously, to other consultants, this sounds like you're doing yourself out of a job, and you should never do yourself out of a job. But actually, I don't, like academics, they always write at the end of the paper, more research is needed. I feel that actually sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes people can just fly with it. And that's why I always say coaching is not always the solution. The other example was basically a CTO in a company of about 50 staff, I think 25, 30 engineers. He'd been there when there was only five of them. And so obviously, 90% increase in size for the business. And he used to always think as an individual contributor. He had no idea that he's operating as an individual contributor. And we worked actually for quite a few months because, it is quite a shift. He started by the end of we worked through why he felt unable to challenge the CEO, how he was looking at the business strategy and what that meant for engineering. How do you build tech strategy? We worked through conflict avoidance and how avoiding conflict was giving him more conflict. So we worked through all sorts of kind of situations like that. And by the end of 6 months, he created a tech strategy, with my support. And his CEO actually said that he was 70% CTO comparing to 5% CTO, which is what he was like when he started. So to me, that feels like a win.
You've probably coached, I don't know, a lot of CTOs and people in these roles. I just want to ask, how common do you think imposter syndrome is? And the reason I ask that is I know someone I speak to a lot of people in the industry. I have a friend, someone I know quite well, who is CTO of actually a well-known tech company in Europe, who a couple of years ago actually said to me, kind of not in work situation, in a sort of personal situation, that he felt like he was going to get found out, that this was, that this role was so big and it was so visible. And I was actually quite shocked. And I'm curious, how often do you see that?
Yeah, so very good question, by the way, Gareth. Thank you. I would say 99% of them feel like that. There was one person that I worked with, a CTO in a company of, I think it was 3,000 people at the time. And he said, he said that he didn't feel imposter syndrome anymore. He literally tackled that himself. He said he had felt it 5 years prior when he had started the role. But now he felt like he knew what he's doing and he's brilliant at everything. And that actually is the very reason why the company started asking me to work with him, because he wasn't actually brilliant at everything. He just thought he was. So it can go the other way, to be honest, as well. But I would say if you feel that you're going to be found out and you worry you're not good at what you're doing, you're probably doing a better job than the people who don't worry that they're going to be found out. That's my suggestion. From I would say it's probably over 100 CTOs I worked with by now, because I started doing this in 2012 on with various contexts, and I can see, and I've worked with thousands of engineers, who then got promoted to CTO as well, and it's a very common, I'd say.
I wonder if that's a bit like climbers, because I have a friend who's a climber, and I asked him once, aren't you ever afraid of heights? And he said, I'm always afraid of heights. And he actually said that most people,
but you do
the
it
best
anyway.
climbers, but you do it anyway. And he said most climbers are afraid of heights. It's the ones that aren't that end up having the accidents and all the rest of it, who have no fear. Right.
Yeah,
anyway.
spot on. Yeah, spot on. Absolutely.
And Adelina, you emphasize the importance of creating tailored action plans for CTOs rather than copying others. So what would you say are some key factors you consider when developing these personalized strategies?
Well, so that's an interesting question. Yeah, because this is the very reason why I do a discovery phase first. Like if you go, there's a lot of people who say that they do business coaching, executive coaching, CTO coaching, whatever. But when you go to I would say the majority, from my experience, of people who do that sort of thing, their answer always is, let's do a few sessions of coaching together and see how we get on, see how it goes, see what results you get. That's not my approach. I like to reverse engineer backwards from where I want to be. So from my perspective, you need to, I do a discovery phase first to understand what is the cause of the symptoms you're experiencing. Because when a CTO comes to me and says, oh, I think I need some help, the experience he or she is having are symptoms of the causes. They're not the causes themselves. So a key aspect of building a customized action plan is to understand what's causing it. It's so easy to tick the box and say, let's do 6 sessions of coaching, see how we get on. That doesn't you're just literally bumbling through dark. Plus, the disadvantage is that you are literally just working with one person through their own filter. The reason I speak to 3 other people about them at different levels in relation to them is because it helps me understand the problems this person sees as opposed to just the problems that the person themselves sees. You see what I mean? It gives me a broader view.
Oh,
And
very
then I can
interesting.
devise.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the discovery phase, one
Yeah.
option is you don't need my help. Here's a solution. Take it black and white. Or then the solution sometimes is all you need is to understand how to make this business case to the board. If you understand business cases, then you're golden. Everything else will roll. Or sometimes, and the business case can be a standalone exercise. So I worked with a CTO in a company of 4,000 people. Company's been going on for 20 years. And he'd been in the company for about 8 years. Very successful CTOs, very commercial, serial CTO. I think this was his fourth or fifth position, 14 years experience as CTO. And he could not get this development over the line with the board. They just never bought into it. 9 months of negotiations went by and he couldn't get a yes out of them. So even someone who's very experienced, oh, let's do some coaching. Well, the problem he had was very simply, why are these people saying no to my proposal? I think he makes business sense. He thought that if you asked him, he'd say he's a commercial CTO. But when I discovered that actually the way he was explaining things to the board was not the way the board understood them, even though he was commercial about it, he didn't give them the right data to make the right choices.
But Adelina, I mean, all those stories, I mean, it's very interesting. All the change that you've seen, that you've helped create, and I can't help but wonder, but how did you end up into that job? Because your background is more academics, advising. So, what unique values do you have that made it happen? That here you are advising CTOs when we see so many fractional CTOs, CTO calls that were CTOs themselves.
I've never been a CTO myself. Absolutely beautiful. So the key difference I'll say, and if you like, I can go back through my background of how I know this, but the key difference between me and a fractional CTO is that a fractional CTO will have done a few CTO jobs, and there's lots of different types of fractional CTOs. There are fractional CTOs that have done the CTO role for 10, 15, 20 years. And there's also fractional CTOs who are fractional CTOs once or twice, if you look at their background, in total of about 3 to 5 years, maybe 7 if they're lucky. And then you discover that actually they ended up being a fractional CTO because they couldn't find another role as CTO. And that's a way of coping with it. But there's lots of different types of fractional CTO as well. So that goes in lots of subcategories. But the difference is that I have worked, and I can tell you if you want, I can answer that question as well, how, but I have worked with CTOs, in companies as small as 10 people and in companies as big as 140,000, 100,000 people. And I see the patterns, I see the huge breadth of what the CTO role is about. And this is why I say, in some companies, the CTO role is run by someone called SVP engineering. In another company, it's called director of engineering. In another one, is head of engineering. And when I look at how they spend their time day to day, which I care about rather than the label they have, I discover that they are effectively a CTO. The most senior executive in engineering. That's what the CTO is. So the difference between me and a kind of fractional CTO is that no, I've not done the job like them, but actually I don't need to do the job like them to be able to advise them what good looks like. Because I've seen, compared to one CTO, coming back to don't copy other CTOs, my customers come to me usually after they've had, to be honest, some advice or some business coaching from a former CTO that was often put to them by the board. And they notice the pattern that this person just teaches them how they did their role without taking into consideration, does this apply to you? So me as a former CTO, I tell you as the CTO I'm mentoring how to do your job, but without really taking into account, does this apply to you in your industry, in your size of company, with your kind of exec? The difference is I've seen hundreds of types of execs, hundreds of types of companies, hundreds of types of industries. So then I can see the patterns of what works and what doesn't. Whilst someone who's been CTOs even 3 times, 5 times won't necessarily know that because they just know their own experience, if that makes sense.
And so I was reading a lot of your work before the interview. I was reading some of your blogs on your website, and it would seem to me, just sort of reading that, you're saying one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem in tech teams, is communication, both within and without the team. Is that a true summary? And if that is so, why do you think that is?
I think often communication is underestimated because people think, well, I talk every day. Talking is not communicating. Right? And I think
that's true. Yes.
That is so true, isn't it? We think because we
Yeah.
write emails or texts every day, or because we talk every day to our families, to everyone, we think, I know how to communicate. What you're talking about. One of the things that people miss is that if I had to put two, actually, it would be communication and strategic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine, if you're a CTO, this is real situation. I was called in by an investment fund and said, our CTO, this huge company, they expect a 4x return in like the next 18 months. And the CTO is talking about bug reports in the boardroom. And the board looks at him going, what is this guy talking about? And like, can Adelina fix him? And he's communicating. He thinks he's not communicating. He's talking tech. He's talking geek speak. But actually, that only makes him seen as an incompetent leader, to be honest, because they don't understand bug reports and why they matter. They don't understand tech debt and how's that relevant to the business bottom line. So communication is much more than just saying words. It's about active listening as well. Like, so many people just think because they're silent, they're listening. They're not listening. Sometimes they just listen so they have a response rather than listening to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go on. Feel free to ask, but actually, can I ask you guys a question? about
Sure, we don't usually get questions, so that's great.
Sorry. Yeah. So I was just wondering, what was it that you saw of my work that made you invite me on your brilliant show?
So it's actually me. I found you. I think like I saw other engineering leaders liking your post on LinkedIn, and then I followed what you were publishing for a little while, and then I found like interesting your approach. I was especially interested into the approach because we have a lot of like I said, CTO coach, etc. Or we hear or we get contacted, Gareth and myself, by a number of them, but that your background is not really in tech. And that's an angle that I find very interesting.
It's in tech for the last 8-9 years, but I'm not an engineer in tech.
I was going to say, so my answer to your question is very easy, actually, is I looked through some of your articles and I saw your picture with Stephen Hawking. And so I wanted to ask you what it was like to meet Stephen Hawking. That was pretty much the reason that you have to have her on so we can ask her that question.
Brilliant. Yeah. Stephen Hawking, absolutely amazing human. I have to say, I feel very privileged because basically a friend of mine invited me to his 40th birthday party back in 2015. And he never told me that he used to work with Stephen Hawking. And I turned up at this party. I had horrible depression at the time, actually. That's why you can see from the picture, my face is horribly red because I've been crying for like half an hour holding Stephen Hawking's hand. And it was so interesting because I walked in with my boyfriend at the time. And we're in a community centre. Do you know what I mean? Not a fancy venue or one of the Cambridge colleges or anything. And I don't go to lots of those dinners. But he wasn't there. It was a community centre in a tiny village, And I walked in and I went, oh my God, that's Stephen Hawking. I went to my friend and said, is this Stephen Hawking? I'm like, think mad. And he said, yeah, of course. I've been working with him for years.
Else, really.
Yeah. I just thought I'm having a vision. Do you know what I mean? I don't drink alcohol, by the way, for various health reasons. But and I thought I'm not drunk, so it can't be that. And I walked in and he said, go and talk to him. So I went, okay, then if I have permission, sometimes we feel that we need permission to do certain things. So I went up to him and I said, Professor Hawking, I'm just starstruck right now. I think you're awesome. And I, blurted out like 10 minutes of, you're amazing. And he looked at me and one of his nurses said to me, do you want to sit down and hold his hand? And I was like, can I? And she said, yeah, he won't mind. I was like, are you sure? Like, because obviously he hasn't. So it takes him absolutely forever to respond. Because of you go letter by letter, with your eyes. Yeah, it's really so. I didn't realize that to begin with. And then I think one of the nurses said, I think he wants to know what you do. And I explained I'm the Geek Whisperer. I had kind of this brand at the time, but I hadn't published it because I was scared people of the backlash that people say, oh, look how rude, all the rest of it. And then the nurses took him on stage and we started dancing on stage. It was just the most surreal experience. I wish I had a video of it. And we were like, he was, the nurses pushing his chair around and we were twirling around on stage. It was amazing, honestly. And then everybody, when people got drunk, everybody started asking for pictures with me, Professor Hawking. I'd been spending the evening with him and I hadn't asked for a picture yet because it didn't even cross my mind. I don't think about these things. And then everybody started queuing up to take pictures with him at the end without any of them talking to him, which I didn't think was fair, to be honest. But anyway, so I said to one of the nurses, can I be cheeky and say, could I have a picture of Professor Hawking? Would he be happy with that? Because I feel like, they're speaking on his behalf. You know what I mean? I felt like I don't want him to feel. Anyway, she said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And my phone didn't work. And I was like, oh, geez, I'm never going to get a picture. So one of his nurses took the picture on her phone and sent it to me. And that's how I have one picture, which is amazing. Sorry, a bit of a long story.
Very cool. No, very cool story. Anyway, Ron.
Yeah, no, very briefly, like, can you reportedly boosted engineering performance by 2 to 5 times, save significant cost per project. Could you provide some specific examples of metrics that demonstrate these results?
Yeah, so there's a few examples on my website as well. So I'm trying to think actually, because those are the ones that were easier to measure. Because often, people really struggle to measure these kind of things. So I'm trying to think from so one of them was that I remember one of the projects that we did, I reduced the sprint cost from, I think, gosh, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but I think it was from, so I think that the sprint was taking like 6 weeks or something, and it was wasting, I think, $100,000 dollars a week at the time, and we managed to reduce that because of, frankly, improved communication. I'm not even joking, because we improved the communication between the engineers and the project and the product managers. That's all we did. And that reduced the sprint to 2 weeks, and it was like, $100,000 saved. So instead of spending like $600,000 per sprint, they were spending only like 200,000 or something, which was insane, But my biggest return on investment was the biggest one. I think it was in a company of 3,000 people, and I think it's on the website, but I think, if I remember correctly, the VP of engineering, which was the most senior person in engineering in that company, said that they saved, the project saved them 15 million pounds. And I asked him, and I'm not joking, that project cost them 35,000 pounds, by the way, like from the cost side. And I said, how did you calculate that? And he said, because you helped us accelerate this engineering delivery. And if you hadn't told me at this juncture back to this kind of diagnostic phase, if I don't tell you quickly what's happening next, if you don't do anything about this, then you go down the wrong track. And he said, I would have lost 15 million pounds in staff time, staff retention, project delivery. And he calculated it apparently over 6 months. 15 divided by 6 months, you can figure out per month how much it would cost him. So, but I have to tell you, so this is a very good question, actually. Thank you for that. Because what I discovered is that commercially minded companies can give me a return on investment of our projects. Startups and scale-ups can never answer my question. And that's because 99% of CTOs in startups and scale-ups do not know the cost of engineering. And that was a very interesting discovery for me, coming back to this point of working with big companies and small companies.
For this podcast, there's a book you wanted to recommend called Obviously Awesome: How to Nail Product Positioning So Customers Get It, Buy It, Love It, by April Dunford. Can you tell us more about this book?
Yeah, so April Dunford is the queen of market positioning. If you Google her name, you'll see she is literally the market positioning person in the world. Actually, I'm very privileged and lucky to say that she was also my mentor for about a year. And she is brilliant because she worked in IBM and lots of tech companies, so understands tech very well. And she talks about market positioning and how it's absolutely crucial to a startup being able to scale and frankly grow. And it's, I think, a book that if most CTOs or engineers read, they would get some interesting insights about their own work and how the business's market positioning is so crucial to engineering and how everything is tied together. And I think if more CTOs and engineers understood better the other departments and how, especially marketing, how they contribute to shaping what engineering is doing, it would do well for their careers.
In a previous role, you said, you were teaching emerging leaders within corporations how to showcase the value propositions of their project ideas. So how would you best define a value proposition? I mean, we in a tech company, let's say, because we hear that phrase thrown around a lot, right? So product or company centric instead of customer centric. So how do you define that?
Well, so first of all, I still do that. In fact, I did it last week. It's an ongoing role that I have with Cambridge University. So I guest lecture on the Cambridge University Leadership Program for corporations. I've been lecturing with various departments at Cambridge University for the last 12 years. So, but it's one of the remaining Cambridge University jobs I have. But yeah, so from my perspective, how I summarize value proposition. So on these programs, what I do is in a very practical kind of manner, I go through real work situations. People have to convince their executives, CTO to CEO to CMO to COO, CSO, etc., CFO, on why they should approve budget for something or another, right? So that's kind of the context of that. And one of the things that, in order to build a value proposition, it's not just, people often think, well, if I talk about the problems we have, but the problem without the size of the problem, and even more importantly, the timing of the problem, is it time to solve it now? Or if not, why shouldn't we leave it for another 6 months? And why now? I used to do pitches for investment, for companies coming out of Cambridge University and other places. Why now? The importance to budget and to business of why now is often overlooked. In my experience of listening to probably over 1,000 pitches in the last 13 years, is the fact that people miss why now. Why should you invest in our company now and not in 3 years' time? Why should you give budget for us to hire more engineers now and not next year? Why now is, if you ask yourself why now and you don't have the answer for it, you probably have no clear value proposition anyway.
I think you should write that as a book, Adelina. I think you should write a book called Why Now?
Yeah, because you have Simon Sinek with his now, why, tell him about why. Why on its own, without the context of why now, why this problem, why this solution, why you, is, to be honest, pretty pointless. And Simon Sinek in my book does a lot of disservice by peddling all sorts of rubbish like that actually, without genuine business context, adds no real value in a real business situation. In an abstract one, I'm sure it does.
Okay. And my last question. So you wrote a post about a CTO's thinking they need to say yes to everything, and I think actually this could apply to any leader, right? So you said you can be a kind person and still say no, prioritize your needs, set boundaries, disagree with people, be honest, challenge poor behavior, walk away from toxic environments, make mistakes, stand up for yourself, protect your time and space. A really good list. And I would suggest one modification. So disagree with people and be comfortable with people disagreeing with you. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
100%, yes. So a lot of people associate, especially these days when debate seems to have become a personal attack, disagreement with "you hate me." Well, no, we can disagree. Let's agree to disagree. We can disagree and still feel that for the rest of the stuff, I still respect you. Disagreeing doesn't mean you hate me or I hate you. It just means that we have different views. Now, there's a way to disagree in a respectful manner. Like, for example, as I mentioned earlier, active listening. Disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing, well, then I do lose respect, because
Yeah.
you haven't actually listened or argued anything useful. You just say no all the time, right?
Right.
But you see what I mean? So it's and in my experience, being comfortable with people disagreeing with you is directly related to how self-aware and how much self-esteem you have. So if, for example, you have self-awareness and you have enough self-esteem to know that even when you're wrong and even when you make mistakes, you're no less of a person. There's nothing wrong with you as a human being. There's just some wrong action you took, which is separate from you. Then you don't have that much of a problem with people disagreeing with you, and you're quite comfortable in the uncomfortableness of disagreement. Well, if you think about it, if you see your actions and your opinions as an extension of your value as a human being, then when someone attacks an action or an opinion that you have, therefore they're attacking you.
That's a really, really good point.
It's a good way to end this podcast, Adelina. But it's a very good last word. I mean, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really love the questions.
Thank you, and for everybody listening, we will be back in 2 weeks. Bye bye.